The scream cut through the music like a blade, not a scream of pain, something worse, the kind of sound that tears out of someone when the mind cannot make sense of what the eyes are seeing. Priya Nalan slowly lowered her champagne glass onto the table. Across the Meridian Grand Ballroom, Chicago's most exclusive venue, the kind of place where a single table cost more than most people's cars, every conversation died at once. Laughter vanished. Music faded into irrelevance. Forks froze midair. Every head turned toward the entrance, and the second Priya looked up, she understood why. Dani Osei stood at the top of the sweeping marble staircase. Dani, the woman who cleaned Priya's bathrooms, the woman who ironed her silk blouses, the woman who had spent the last 7 months on her knees scrubbing grout from Priya's kitchen tiles for $14 an hour. That Dani. Standing beneath crystal chandeliers in a gown so breathtaking it made every woman in the room look as though they had dressed in darkness. Ivory silk, not white, ivory. A shade so rare it seemed to shift with the light, like moonlight floating across water. Thousands of hand-stitched glass beads flowed from the neckline to the hem in luminous cascades. Each bead caught the ballroom lights and fractured them into sparks. The silhouette was impossible to ignore, architectural, precise. Sculpted with the kind of perfection no machine could ever replicate. This was not fashion, this was art. Is that? Someone behind Priya stopped breathing mid-sentence. Then a man spoke. His voice trembled. That's an Adès original. The final word cracked. I covered the Adès runway show in Milan. That dress, his eyes widened. That's the closing night piece. A woman near the front table pressed a hand to her chest. That dress wasn't for sale. Her voice dropped into disbelief. It was never for sale. The family keeps every closing collection piece. Priya felt the floor tilt beneath her heels. No, this was wrong, impossible. This was not how tonight was supposed to unfold. 3 days earlier, Priya had been standing in her walk-in closet with her 2 closest friends, Jade Morrow and Skylar Fitch. The 3 of them watched as Dani folded a cashmere throw on the bed in the adjoining room. Priya had smiled, the dangerous kind. The kind that existed only when cruelty disguised itself as generosity. I have an idea, she said loudly enough for every word to carry. She walked to the bedroom doorway. Dani. She paused just long enough to ensure Jade and Skylar stood directly behind her. An audience mattered. I'm hosting a table at the Meridian Gala on Saturday. The charity event, she tilted her head. You've probably seen the invitations on my desk. Dani looked up, brown eyes steady, calm, controlled. That composure had always irritated Priya. Dani never reacted the way people were supposed to, never flinched enough, never begged enough, never shrank enough. Priya continued. Tickets are $8,000 each. A smile touched her lips. I've decided to give you one. Silence stretched, deliberate, sharp. It's exclusive, Priya said. Everyone who matters in this city will be there. She let the next sentence linger like poison. I thought you deserved a night out. Then came the final blow, the one she intended to wound. Wear whatever you have, a beat. I'm sure you'll find something appropriate. She turned away. Jade and Skylar followed. They barely reached the hallway before the laughter started, soft at first. Then vicious, the kind of laughter designed to cut deeper because it pretends to be casual. Cruelty always sounds lighter when shared. Did you see her face? Jade nearly doubled over laughing. She's going to show up in something from Target, Skylar snorted. The entire room will know she's the help. Inside the half-open bedroom, Dani remained still. She continued folding the cashmere throw. Her hands moved automatically, precise, practiced, but her mind had already gone elsewhere. She waited, listened. Allowed the laughter to fade farther down the hallway until silence returned. Then she placed the throw gently on the bed, walked to her bag, removed her phone. Stared at a contact she had not called in 6 months. Her thumb hovered, then pressed. The line rang once, twice. Then connected, Dani inhaled. "Mama." Her voice remained steady. But something inside it had changed. "I need the ivory dress." What Priya Nalan never knew, what none of them knew about the woman scrubbing her floors, was that Dani Osei had never belonged to the world they assigned her. Dani Osei was not ordinary. Her mother was Adez Osei. If that name meant nothing to you, then you weren't part of fashion. Adez had built one of the most revered design houses on earth from a single rented studio in Lagos. By the time Dani turned 12, Adez gowns were appearing on Grammy stages and royal balconies. By 16, museums were requesting her designs for permanent exhibition. By 20, Adez creations had appeared on the covers of every major fashion publication across 3 continents. Dani had not merely admired that empire from a distance. Dani had been raised inside it. Private schools, apartments in London and New York, front row seats at every show, a name that opened doors so fast she'd never once had to knock. And that was the problem. At 24, Dani had realized she didn't know who she was without the name. Every friendship, every opportunity, every room she'd ever walked into, it had all come through the door of being Adez's daughter. She couldn't separate herself from the inheritance, couldn't know if anything she'd built was actually hers, so she'd made a deal with her mother. 1 year, completely anonymous. No access to family accounts, no using the she name. A real job in a real city, starting from nothing to find out who Dani was when the name was stripped away. Her mother had cried, then agreed. One condition: if Dani ever truly needed her, she would be there within 24 hours. Dani had chosen Chicago, found the housekeeping agency, moved into a studio apartment with second-hand furniture and a mattress that was too soft. She'd learned what tired felt like in her feet. She'd learned what it meant to be invisible, to stand in a room and have people look past her, through her, around her. People like Priya Nalan, who spoke to her the way you speak to a piece of furniture. She'd planned to finish the year. Then Priya had stood in the doorway with that smile, and everything had changed. Dani stared at her phone after the call ended. She'd given 7 months to this experiment. She'd proven what she needed to prove. Time to remember who she was. The package arrived 18 hours later. Not by courier van, by a black car with a driver who buzzed the apartment intercom and handed her a sealed garment case, followed by 4 more people. Her mother's head stylist, 2 assistants, a makeup artist, all of them carrying black cases of their own. "Your mother sends her love," the stylist said, unzipping the main garment bag. And her best work. The ivory dress came out like a living thing. It shifted in the apartment light, the glass beads catching and scattering every photon in the room. Dani had seen it once before, on the runway in Milan under stage lights, as the closing piece of her mother's most acclaimed collection. Critics had called it architectural poetry. A museum in Amsterdam had offered to buy it. Her mother had declined. And now it was here, in a studio apartment with second-hand furniture, because Priya Nalan had wanted to see a housekeeper embarrass herself. There was a note in the garment case, handwritten. "You were never invisible. You were just choosing to be quiet. Come home when you're ready. Mama." Dani folded the note carefully and put it in her pocket. Then she sat down in the chair they'd set up by the window and let them get to work. 5 hours later, she looked in the mirror. The woman looking back didn't look like a housekeeper. Didn't look like Adez's daughter playing dress-up. Didn't look like anyone's idea of anything. She looked like herself. Finally, fully herself. She picked up her bag and walked out. Back in the ballroom, Dani descended the marble staircase. The crowd parted, not on purpose, not with any intention. The way crowds part when something moves through them that they don't quite know how to stand next to. Phones came up, voices dropped. Someone near the bar actually dropped their drink. Priya was frozen. Jade had reached out and grabbed her wrist without realizing it. Dani crossed the ballroom floor like she'd been crossing ballroom floors her whole life, which she had. She moved through the parted crowd with no urgency, no performance, no anger on her face. Just a calm so complete it was almost unsettling. She stopped in front of Priya, Mrs. Nalan. Her voice was warm. "Thank you so much for the invitation. This was incredibly generous of you." Priya's mouth moved. No sound. "You told me to wear whatever I had." Dani touched the dress once lightly at the waist. "I hope this is appropriate." Somewhere behind Priya, a man laughed. One sharp burst of startled sound, quickly swallowed. Jade had let go of Priya's wrist. Her voice was barely a breath. How did you that dress?" "I know that dress. That's from the Adez Milan show. My mother made it." The words dropped into a silence so complete that half the ballroom heard them. Jade's voice cracked. "Your mother is Adez." Dani tilted her head slightly. "Adez Osei. Perhaps you've heard of her." Then the room erupted. Not all at once, in waves. A gasp, then a ripple, then the full roar of 200 people simultaneously processing the same impossible information. Priya stood at the center of it like a woman in the eye of a storm. And unlike storms, this one wasn't moving around her. This one was looking directly at her. Priya found out what it felt like to become invisible inside of 20 minutes. The conversations that stopped when she approached. The eyes that slid away. Jade had walked off without explanation. Skylar was on the far side of the room having what looked like an animated, horrified conversation with someone Priya didn't recognize. Meanwhile, Dani was surrounded. Fashion editors, executives from brands Priya had been trying to get meetings with for 2 years. The chairwoman of the charity, the venue owner, all of them leaning in, laughing, touching the dress, asking questions. Dani answered each one like she had all the time in the world. Priya's husband found her against the far wall. Nate Nolan was not a man who raised his voice. He didn't need to. 43 years old, built a commercial real estate empire from the ground up. The kind of man who communicated everything essential without changing his expression. He leaned in close. "Tell me what happened," he said quietly. "I didn't know who she was." "You invited our employee to a charity gala as what? A social joke, and she turns out to be Dani Osei's daughter." He paused. "That's not a sentence I expected to say tonight. I didn't know." "You were cruel to her for 7 months without knowing." His voice didn't change. "What exactly did you think you were doing?" Priya said nothing. The Osei family has business relationships with every major development firm in Europe and 3 of the largest commercial real estate funds in the world. Nate's jaw was tight. Dani Osei personally sits on the board of 2 major foundations that we have been trying to partner with for 18 months. "Do you understand what you've done?" Priya's throat closed. "Fix it," Nate said. "Tonight or tomorrow you'll be fixing it without my name." He straightened his jacket, walked away, and Priya stood there alone in the middle of the most exclusive gala in Chicago. For the first time in her adult life, understanding what it felt like to take up space in a room and wish you didn't. She waited until the crowd around Dani had thinned. Then she crossed the room. She walked the same marble floor she'd walked 100 times at events like this, but it had never felt this long before. "Dani." She kept her voice steady by force of will. "Can I speak with you for a moment?" Dani excused herself from the conversation she was having gracefully, without showing anything on her face. She followed Priya to a quiet alcove near the back of the room. Priya had prepared words, they evaporated. "I'm sorry," she said instead, just that, raw and graceless and real. "What I did, the invitation, the way I said it, I was trying to humiliate you. I've treated you badly for 7 months. I'm sorry." The silence that followed was the longest of her life. "Why?" Dani said. "Why what? Why were you cruel to me?" Her voice carried no accusation. Genuine question. Priya opened her mouth. The honest answer was embarrassing in its smallness. "Because I thought you couldn't do anything about it. because you were safe to be cruel too. She didn't have to say it out loud. Dani watched her face and understood. That's what I thought, Dani said quietly. You weren't cruel to me because of anything I did. You were cruel because you assumed you could be, because you thought I had no power. She paused. That's the thing about people who only treat others well when there's something to gain. The moment the mask slips, everything's visible. Priya couldn't meet her eyes. I believe you're sorry, Dani said, and her voice impossibly was soft. I forgive you, Priya, but I need you to understand what tonight actually was, not what happened to me. What it showed about you. That's the part you have to carry. She said it the way you tell someone a hard truth, not to punish them, but because leaving them in ignorance would be its own kind of cruelty. Priya nodded. Her eyes burned. Dani returned to the party. Priya stayed in the alcove for a long time. 2 days later, Dani was boxing up her studio apartment. It was a small operation. She'd arrived with almost nothing and accumulated very little. 7 months of plain furniture, second-hand dishes, shoes that didn't match what she was used to. She'd been surprised over time by how much she didn't miss. The money, the name, the ease of every door opening. She hadn't missed any of it. She'd missed her mother's voice, the smell of the design studio, the specific kind of joy that came from watching someone put on a dress that made them feel like themselves for the first time. A knock at the door. Priya Nalan stood in the hallway, no designer outfit, no blowout, just a woman in jeans and a simple coat. Her face a little older looking than it had been 2 days ago in the way that some kinds of honesty age you. I know you're leaving, Priya said. I just wanted to say goodbye properly. Dani stepped back to let her in. Priya stood in the middle of the small apartment and looked around at the second-hand furniture, the single plant on the windowsill, the neatly stacked boxes. You really lived like this, she said, not with pity, something more like awe. The whole time, that was the point. What did it teach you? Priya asked, and for the first time it wasn't a performance. It was a real question from someone who genuinely needed to know. Dani was quiet for a moment. That dignity doesn't come from the outside. Everyone I know from my old life moves through the world assuming they deserve to take up space because they were told to, because the world confirms it. But that assumption gets tested when it's removed. She picked up a stack of books and placed them in a box. I learned that I still knew who I was without the name. That was the real question. That's what I came here to answer. Priya sat down on the edge of the stripped mattress. I've been doing things differently this week, she said quietly. Small things. Noticing the way I talk to people I think don't matter. A pause. I had a lot of noticing to do. I know, I want to be better. Priya's voice was barely audible. I don't know how to become that without someone telling me I was terrible first. Dani smiled, the first real smile she'd offered her. Most of us don't. That's what this whole thing was about. After Priya left, Dani sealed the last box. She stood in the empty apartment for one moment, looked at the walls where she'd spent 7 months becoming someone she'd always almost been. Then she picked up her bag and walked out without looking back. The Invisible Line collection launched 8 months later. Paris, private venue near the Seine. The guest list included fashion editors, artists, celebrities who moved between continents like weather. Adai stood at the door greeting arrivals in a red dress that had taken 3 months to make. But in the front row, 50 seats had been reserved. 50 people who had never attended a fashion show in their lives. Housekeepers, nannies, hospital orderlies, personal assistants. All of them dressed for tonight in pieces from the new collection. The collection was built around a single premise. Every stitch of clothing in the line had been designed in collaboration with domestic workers. Women and men who had spent their careers making wealthy lives possible without being credited for any of it. A portion of every sale went directly into a scholarship fund for their children. Dani stood backstage as the show began. Through a gap in the curtain, she could see the front row, could see the faces of the housekeepers and assistants as the models came out. Her mother's work filtered through their stories. Some of them had their hands pressed to their mouths. A woman in the second seat from the left was quietly crying. Adise appeared at her shoulder, took her hand without speaking. They stood there together and watched. After the show, the venue opened for mingling, and Dani moved through the room talking to the women from the front row, learning names and histories she should have been learning all along. Somewhere in the crowd, she spotted a face she hadn't expected to see. Priya Nalan had flown to Paris. She was standing near the back, holding her champagne glass with two hands, looking at the exhibition panels along the walls. Photographs of domestic workers from 15 countries. Each one captioned with their name, their years of service, their dream for their children. She'd been looking at one panel for a long time. Dani walked over. "You came," she said. Priya turned. Her eyes were red at the edges. "I needed to see it." She gestured at the room, at the front row women still laughing with each other, at the collection, at the photographs. "I needed to see what you built from what I tried to break." Dani stood beside her and looked at the panel Priya had been studying, a photograph of a woman in her 50s. A hotel housekeeper for 22 years. The caption read, "She put 3 children through college. None of them know how hard it was." "Night," Priya said slowly. "When you walked into that ballroom, I thought you came to destroy me. I know, but you didn't. You could have." Her voice was quiet. "You had every reason to, and you didn't. Destroying you wasn't the point," Dani said. "The point was that the room needed to see what it looks like when you assume someone is less than you, and you're wrong. Not wrong because she turned out to be somebody famous." She paused. "Wrong because she was always somebody before the dress, before the name. She was somebody because she was a person. That's all it takes." Priya looked at her for a long time. Then she nodded, the slow, deliberate nod of someone filing something permanent. "I'm volunteering now," she said, "at a workforce training center. It's uncomfortable in ways I didn't anticipate." A breath. "I keep realizing how small my world was. That discomfort is good," Dani said. "Stay with it." They stood side by side in front of the photograph for another quiet moment. "Thank you," Priya said finally, "for not being what I expected, for being someone worth learning from even when I didn't deserve it." Dani picked up 2 glasses from a passing tray and handed one over. "We're all works in progress," she said, "every single one of us." They touched glasses, the photograph watched from the wall. A woman who had put 3 children through college without anyone knowing how hard it was. Dani made a note to find out her name, her real name, and make sure it was somewhere permanent. She flew home the next morning. Her mother was asleep when she got in. It had been a long week. Dani moved quietly through the apartment, past the design studio with its bolts of fabric and pinned patterns, and the singular organized chaos that she had grown up inside. She stopped in the doorway of the studio. On the dress form near the window, her mother had pinned a sketch, "New collection." The pencil lines were fast, intuitive, the way Addie's worked when something was pouring out of her that she couldn't stop. Along the bottom of the sketch, in her mother's handwriting, "For the girl who went away and came back herself." Dani stood there in the doorway for a long time, not because she was sad, not because she was nostalgic, because it occurred to her clearly, and for the first time, that she had never once, in 7 months of living without her name, stopped being herself. The name could be removed. The money could be removed. The access and the ease and the open doors, all of it gone. And she had still been Dani. That was the answer she'd gone looking for. She finally had it. The measure of who you are isn't what you have. It's who you remain when everything is taken away, and how you treat the people who never had to begin with.